So I have been involved with charities and change for a very long time. My particular passions, the things that kind of get me riled up and therefore involved, are broadly around developing equality of opportunity and changing systems. I have a preference for working in the early intervention prevention space, and particularly around young people. So my background has been around preventing youth homelessness, helping develop resilient and mentally and emotionally strong young people through mental health, and sort of other broad kind of youth-oriented services and programs, education, and other types of social and economic participation, and I suppose active citizenship. I have a view that we all have the ability and the responsibility to be active builders of the kind of world that we want to live in, but that many of us, for whatever reason, sometimes have that ability diminished, either because of context or circumstance or life choice or unavoidable experience. And so the onus kind of then is on the rest of us to help put back that ability in people to be flourishing participants in their own life and positive contributors to the lives of their community. So I've chosen careers and experiences that have given me the opportunity to put that kind of passion and interest into play, hence my career through various non-profit, philanthropic and charitable causes. I'm involved with a number of organisations outside of my day job in boards and advocacy and advisory roles. I sit on the board of the National Museum of Australia in Canberra, which is one of our national arts cultural institutions. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Centre for Social Impact, which is a national alliance of 4 universities across the country that teach and research and practice in developing positive social impact. And I'm on the board of a number of basically youth-oriented charities, as well as my role with PA.
And Kids Undercover, can you tell us about them?
Certainly. Kids Undercover is a Victorian-based charity that works to prevent youth homelessness. So most youth homelessness in Australia is caused by family breakdown. And where that family breakdown doesn't present an immediate physical or emotional risk to the young person, quite often it's from overcrowding, multiple generations in a small home, challenges relating to either mental health, disability, and poverty often, that leads young people to start that couch surfing experience. So if you can keep the family unit together, if you can diffuse that disruptive element that sends the young person out to escape, then you have a much better chance of positive outcomes, not just for the young person, but for the whole of the extended family. And so Kids Undercover basically puts a studio in the backyard. It's really simple. We've been doing it for 35 years. Young person can move into semi-independent living, 1 or 2 bedrooms. The family is managed by a community service organisation, so they have qualified social workers and youth workers looking after them. And you basically prevent that young person becoming homeless. They stay engaged with school, family, community, and you get much more positive outcomes. Very simple proposition.
Thanks, Sarah. I think you've got that really broad experience, and I think that's so important to the conversation we're having tonight. I can see most of you are dialed in. I just want to introduce myself again. I'm Genevieve Fraser. I'm the Chair of Women in Change. Welcome tonight to our conversation with Sarah Davies. And Sarah has reminded us, even though we're all dialing in virtually, I can't acknowledge the owners of where everyone is, because I'm not sure where you all are, but we should acknowledge the Turrbal people here in Brisbane, where I am. So thanks for that reminder, Sarah. Now, Sarah, tonight we're obviously wanting to have a chat about what's been an extraordinary year, and I think it's fair to say that in December and January, most of us thought that the biggest issue that Australia would be dealing with as far as disasters were the bushfires. And obviously that's not the case, and we don't need to explain the impact of COVID-19, it's all around us. But if you don't mind me asking you, from your perspective, and Philanthropy Australia is there supporting, guiding, and in some ways leading the philanthropists of Australia. What has most surprised you about the disasters we've experienced and what were you expecting for 2020, and what are you seeing so far in that giving space?
So look, I think that Australian philanthropy has really matured and kind of come of age. In the GFC, if you can cast your mind way back when, which was what, sort of 2006 to 2008, and I was running the Australian Communities Foundation at the time, the philanthropy actually copped quite a lot of criticism from the general public because it was seen as missing in action. So it certainly didn't step up. It wasn't visible. It didn't advocate for its causes. It didn't champion its causes, and it certainly didn't increase its giving to respond to community needs at that time. And we did cop quite a lot of flack from politicians, from the general public. There was this sense that philanthropy was sort of looking after itself and retreating because it had whacked, copped its capital investment had reduced. So 12 years later, a number of people were kind of expecting the same thing from philanthropy as a result of the COVID-19 health pandemic and then leading into, an economic crisis. And I have to tell you, it has been the complete and utter opposite. I think Australian philanthropy, since the bushfires and certainly since March, has been absolutely inspirational and outstanding in terms of how it has not just stepped up with its generosity, but stepped up with its voice and its influence and its practice. And this isn't just hypothetical. I have proof of this. We have asked our members what they have actually done differently as a result of COVID-19, and the way that they have responded, the amounts that they're giving, the way they're working with community. I have to tell you, it just gives me tingles every time I think about it. So we've got survey data, I've got evidence of this practice. It is just phenomenal.
And what, Sarah, what figures came through on that survey? Because you've conducted that really recently. We're talking about experienced big givers in Australia. And what did that survey reveal about their response to 2020?
So we ran the survey in May, and what we wanted to see was, look, we can all talk. We're all good talkers in this sector. Let's actually see what the practice is. So 90% of the funders, so we had about 100 responses from the major trusts and foundations around the country. So these are corporate foundations, private family foundations, community foundations, everything large and small and in the middle. So 90% of them by May had already changed their grant making practices and processes in order to better respond to the community. So let's have a look. 50% of them, which is just fantastic, have basically gone back to their existing grant recipients and said, I know we've given you grants for these projects, but if you actually want to use that money for something else, go right ahead. So 50% of them untied existing grants that they were putting into the community. 72% of them had gone back to all their grant partners and said, look, let's just throw out the timetable and the rule book and the processes. Tell us what flexibility you need from us and we will respond. So they've brought forward grant payments, they've postponed reporting deadlines, they've relaxed some of the hoops that you have to jump through in terms of getting perhaps the next, payment in an agreed schedule. 30% of them have introduced a new COVID-19 funding round.
So that's additional funding.
So 30% of them have said, look, we may normally grant in the arts, but actually we're going to introduce a whole new program in COVID-19, and 40% of them have increased the amount of money that they are offering to the community.
Now, Sarah, I've had a question just come in from one of our members, Di Gillies. Hi, Di. And what she's saying is that positive response that you have seen in your members, do you think it's in reaction to the giving from the bushfires? So people were feeling more united, or why do you think that? So are you saying the difference in response to the GFC, and it's not just the amount, it's also the flexibility?
Absolutely.
What do you put that down to?
Actually, I don't think it is about the bushfires, because Australians traditionally, over many decades, have been amongst the world's most generous people in response to giving to disasters.
Right.
So our national psyche and our national behaviour over decades has been that we are extraordinarily generous when there are natural disasters. So the bushfires is just, that's who we are, it's what we've been doing, it's in our sort of DNA as a characteristic. I actually think what's created the shift over the 12 years is Australian philanthropy, I think, particularly in the last kind of 6 to 10 years, has become much more self-reflective. I think that we have embraced an understanding that if we actually want to create change through our grant making and think about impact, we've actually got to kind of slow down a bit and be more understanding of how you create kind of sticky, long-lasting change. So therefore, the practice of philanthropy, the craft, the skills, the tools, the processes, the rules, I think we've been very open to intellectually thinking about it and challenging it. So certainly since my time in this role in the last 5 years, all of the conversations we've had have been about best practice philanthropy. What is it?
And I heard you on the radio the day that so Celeste Barber's fundraising effort is widely known, and I think more successful than anyone, including Celeste, could have imagined. And when and I'm just going to recap it quickly. I think most people are familiar with it, but Celeste is an Australian comedian who has an international following. Her family was directly affected by the bushfires, and as a result, she set up a funding process, and I think, and Sarah, you can correct me, her initial target was $5 million.
No, 30,000. Was her target was 30,000.
Yes, and she had said, I'm going to donate it to the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. And in the end, it raised, and I'm going to throw to Sarah again because she'll have probably the most up-to-date figure. Was it 50 million?
53 billion. 53
million. So what happened recently was that went to court, because obviously along the way Celeste realised this was way more than she had intended to raise, but the court found that because of the way the rules are in Australia, we do need to give to, when we raise funds, we need those funds to go to the place where they were advertised to be going. And I guess what that is, and you and I talked about this earlier this week, Sarah, is there are rules in place for a reason, but the comment you made, and I heard it on ABC radio, was when we give, we need to hasten slowly. Was that a case where, and I think with the absolute best intentions, because there wasn't that planned giving and a collective focus on where things were going to be used, that just got away from her? So I guess my question for you is tell us more about hastening slowly, and if you can, touch on the rules and what they mean in philanthropy and why they're there.
So look, the hastening slowly, in my mind, comes in 2 buckets. So one of the buckets is giving is actually quite complex, and it should be, because it's important and it matters. So there need to be rules and regulations around that safeguard the taxpayer, that safeguard the donor, and actually that safeguard the beneficiary. So, the first point is do no harm. And so in order to do that, you do need a set of guidelines and rules that manage that. And so if you just jump in and assume there are no rules, or assume you know them and you don't check it out, then you can get caught out. But the second reason for hastening slowly is there is a difference. I think there's a significant difference between philanthropy, which is that kind of planned and structured giving where you have an eye on the end game. So it is with design, it's with intent, it's with purpose. You've actually got a vision for the kind of change you want to be part of through your philanthropy. That is a very different set of processes and thinking and engagements than the more instantaneous kind of reflexive generosity when you give to a fundraising appeal, or your friend's doing a fun run, or you walk past someone who's collecting in the street. We need both, but they're actually quite different behaviours. And so the hasten slowly piece is around that planned and structured giving, because actually philanthropy is not about the money. It's about the intent, and it's about the strategy, and it's around the partnerships, and it's around the change. And when you look at what makes good philanthropy, it's not the amount of dollars. It's all in that process of strategy and thinking and intent. And so when I say I think it's important to hasten slowly, it's because of both of those reasons. But coming back to the Celeste Barber example, which I think has been a really valuable lesson to the general community, that actually giving is complex. And so look, tell me if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but you know, every time the Federal Treasury gives a tax deduction for a gift, they see that as income forgone to them. So, we live in a democracy, we vote in a government based on values and principles and policies, and we give up some of our sovereignty to that government to act on our behalf, and we give them money through taxes to pay for it. So there is an accountability when the government spends our taxpayer funds, there is an accountability back to us on what they can do with that money.
But that accountability isn't as flexible as philanthropic funds, is it?
No, and that's why rules are important. So when Treasury says, sure, I'll give you a tax deduction for the money that's going into your giving circle or going into your sub-fund or going into your PAF or going direct to that charity. But I want to make sure that having given you some taxpayer benefit for that in the tax deduction and in the tax concession environment that you operate, I want to make sure that that money is actually going to charitable purposes. And so we have rules around where that money can go. And a lot of those rules, each charity has to have a constitution that has a very clear purpose. And in the case of philanthropy, a very clear trust deed. And so you can only use the money for the purpose that that trust deed outlines and has been approved. And it's the way of creating checks and balances. So when Celeste said, I want my money to go to this particular entity, the legal purpose of that entity is the only way they can spend the money. So the court had no option but to say, no way are we interfering. You can't undo charity law like that. The lesson for all of us is just don't jump in quickly. Actually think about what you're doing. Think about where your money's going. Do the due diligence on, are they registered? Have they got the right DGR status? What is their purpose? So, you know, I actually think this has been a salient lesson for everybody. The court made absolutely the right decision. And we do need good charity law because it protects donors and it is a way of being accountable back to the taxpayer for their contribution through tax deductions.
You talked about flexibility, and one of the things that's come through this year and that is different to the GFC is that philanthropists or people in that field are realising the need to be flexible and give unlinked funding sometimes, or revisiting, as you said, some of their assistance. Now, with Women in Change, we've actually done that with Baby Give Back. They are an organisation. They won our 2019 grant, and their whole service is personal. It is collecting donations from people who give. It is providing donations to people, and it is personal, and it is newborns, and it is vulnerable families. So their whole model had to be completely adjusted. And one of the things that we did was we sat down with them, you know, I think it was about 6 weeks ago, and we said to Carly, okay, I'm imagining that 2020, the plan that you submitted to us in, you know, August last year has probably changed a bit, and we've reworked that, and now they will be spending that money over 18 months. But with our philanthropic dollars, they do work differently. And if we were a government department, we wouldn't have necessarily had the ability to do that. Can you talk a little bit about philanthropy and risk and that sort of thought out, careful giving, and what value we need to place on the ability to flex and be flexible in philanthropy versus tax dollars?
Yeah, I'd love to, because you've actually pushed one of the little buttons. I have lots of little buttons that get, this is one of them. Not every dollar that works towards positive social change is worth the same as another dollar. So this is what I mean by it's not about the money. So if you're a charity and you receive government money, that money comes with a yellow sticky on it that says, please be careful. This money has actually come to you via the taxpayer. We have some obligations around risk management and impact assessment and compliance and reporting because we are the government that you need to comply with. And so when we contract with you and we give you government money, there are a whole bunch of things you're not allowed to do with it because of that rigor and assessment. When the philanthropic dollar comes through the door, the sticky note says something else. The sticky note says, I have a special superpower because I am freely given and I have no restrictions other than the legal use of charitable money and any other wish that my donor might want to put on it. So that money, that dollar, is so much freer than any other dollar in the social change mix, which means that it's our social risk capital. It is the only money at play in the social change sector that can take risks, that can fail, and that can be seen as a success because you learn, that can do the unsexy stuff, that doesn't have to think about electoral cycles, that doesn't have to think about popular elected policy platforms, that can do all the ugly, horrible, gnarly stuff that no one else is prepared to touch because of reputational risk or, you know, quite appropriate for the other parts of the funding mix. But for philanthropy, that freedom, it is the only dollar that has that freedom. So if we spend that dollar in the same way as we spend the government dollar, we have wasted so much of its power. So for philanthropy to really exploit its social risk capital, that's its superpower. And that's why it's worth way more than a dollar in an equivalent sense.
Now, you're obviously familiar with collective giving, being in your role in Philanthropy Australia. We obviously, you know, are in that different group. We are philanthropic. But how does the fact that we have that collective input of 50, 60, nearly 70 people some years into the decision, how does that play into the impact that it ultimately has?
Look, I think there are, the impact comes in many levels. So let's just look at it from a donor perspective. So I think it was Aristotle that said something like, to give away money is easy and in every man's power. But to give it away well is not easy and not in every man's power. And so as a donor, when you're working on your own, that can be quite a lonely, difficult and challenging pursuit. When you work with a tribe of people that you've got shared values and a shared agenda and mission about what you want, the type of change you want to sort of support and create, the benefits for you as a donor are significant. So the impact on me as a donor is I learn more, I have more fun, I make more friends, I get more satisfaction. There are very well evidenced physical, emotional and psychological benefits from pro-social behaviour, like giving and volunteering. So as a donor, the impact on me is all up, is all positive. The impact then on aggregating smaller individual amounts of money so that you've actually got a bigger pot to play with. So you can either support more organisations or more causes, or you can make that contribution go further. So your leverage on that, so your impact on the money has gone up. And then your impact on the organisations or the communities that you partner with in your fund also goes up, because actually what you bring is not one person who's prepared to support and advocate for them, but you bring a little army, and that army will talk about it and spread that in it. You get this contagion effect, because giving is addictive. And if you give well, so you give within, you know, in your tribe, you're sharing that, you're sharing the wins, you're sharing the lessons, you're learning, you're engaging, then actually you just want to do it more and more. So, you know, there is no downside to collective giving for any, I think, of the component parts. I think everybody wins out of it.
It's interesting you say that, Sarah, because Baby Give Back have put a call out to the community, but also to our members. And I'm not going to name her, even though she's on this call, but one of our members spent 2 months and ended up delivering, I can't even tell you how many thousands of nappies from Aldi through a relationship with her. And then after that had happened, and it wasn't just 1,000 nappies, it was enough nappies for 1,000 families, on top of a whole range of other things. And then someone else came in and knew an author who was giving away some books, and then they came back, and a lot of the time our, you know, the recipients of our funds say, they'll come to our grant evenings to brief the new applicants, and they will say to them, don't think it's just about the money with Women in Change. because we got so much more,
Absolutely.
you know, from this. And sometimes it could be a board member, or it could be anything. So that's so interesting that you say that. But just touching on what you said about you get so much more joy. The funny thing, those two beautiful things that have come through, and that they're not the only two, but for Baby Give Back actually gave me joy. And I wasn't even the one organising it, but I felt I was basking in the reflective glow of this. So I think that we're living and feeling what you're saying. I've got a question here from one of our members, Sarah, who's actually one of your Philanthropy Australia members, Sarah Goodman. And she's got a family event, so she can't be here tonight. Aren't we all? Isn't it nice to say that again?
Yeah.
So what Sarah has said is, so Sarah's question is it true many not-for-profits are experiencing funding cuts at a time when demand for their services has increased? And if so, does this mean that a donation, for instance, to the social services sector is more valuable in 2020 than it was in 2019?
That is a fabulous question, and I don't know that there's an answer to it.
Do we need to play music?
Yeah, look, certainly the forecasting and the predictions around giving, not so much this financial year through to next week, but the one that's going to start the week after in the next couple of years, are really quite sobering and severe. So one of our board members, John McLeod, who works for JB Weir, is one of Australia's kind of best forecasters and commentators on this. He's forecasting a sort of a 7% decline in giving to the end of next week, this financial year, and a further kind of 12% decline in giving next year. So, you know, we're looking then at kind of a 20% decline through to the end of June next year. And that's off the back of sort of 4 to 5% increases over the last couple of years. So, you know, if the last couple of years have had sort of 5% increases aggregate each year, and we're now seeing 7% drop this year and a 12% drop the year after, we're basically going back to 2012 levels. That is a huge loss of income for the charity sector. There was a report that came out a couple of weeks ago that Social Ventures Australia and the Centre for Social Impact did, and there's a link to it on our website. They have looked at the balance sheets of registered charities, 16,000 registered charities. So not all non-profits, I'm talking about DGR1 charities. And they have modelled what will happen post-JobKeeper to the size of those charities and the balance sheets of those charities. And what they are saying is when JobKeeper finishes at the end of September, in the next 12 months, the likely impact of that is a loss of 200,000 jobs out of those charities that they analysed. So, you know, the charity sector employs 10% of Australia's workforce. It is itself an economic contributor. So if you take 200,000 jobs out of that, and you not only think then about the impact that's having on the people who are now unemployed, but think about it in terms of the inability of that charity to deliver the essential services at a time when, if we are going to get to 9, 10, 11% unemployment next year, you know, we've got this huge chasm heading our way. So absolutely, I think the next couple of years are, if you look at those forecasts and predictions, are really very sobering. So the best use of the money, I'm not sure. I've never really bought into the argument that if you spend $1 in, say, international development, where the dollar can go further in terms of feeding a family versus here, that it's a better or worse use of the money. Because actually what drives philanthropy, what drives my philanthropy, is what I care about. And what I care about and my values and my experience and where I have invested in the kind of change I want to see. So for me to keep giving, I need to keep giving in an area that I'm going to get a reward from. So those sorts of kind of binary worthy, you know, is it worth more or less, I think miss the point of philanthropy. And I think the other thing that is really interesting is everybody has a different mix of needs in what it takes for them to get up in the morning and feel well and healthy and positive. That might be needing to be part of an artistic community. It might be for someone else a job. For someone else, it might be access to medication. You know, who are we to make that judgment about what it is that people really need? And so that actually comes back to, you know, our first conversation around the practice of philanthropy. And at the core of really good philanthropy is putting the community at the centre of all your decisions. So the community knows more than anybody else what they need at any particular time. And actually they should be the ones that are telling us where the best use of that money is.
It's interesting you say that, because when we started out in 2014, you know, we were obviously expecting to read the grants and to do some due diligence and to come together and talk about which ones we thought would have an impact. But what it actually became was, it was like having your finger on the pulse of what was going on in the community. So the applications would come in, and any of us who've worked on that over the last 6 years have realised that sometimes the grant applications, which open next month for us, from the expressions of interest through the full applications, tell a story. And in 2014, the story was that violence against women was becoming a problem that needed to be urgently addressed. And in other years, it was the drought. And in other years, it was access to healthcare in remote regions. And in other times, it was refugees. And it's really interesting, because one of the things that I've found with Women in Change is the applications that come into us tell a story. And it sounds like we're going to get a very interesting story this year. And for whatever reason, the people who apply to us tend to be the people who are looking ahead, often 2-5 years and are coming up with a solution to a problem that some of us didn't even know existed yet. And Carers Foundation's a classic example. In your research that you've done recently with your members, we need all things. We need arts, we need culture, we need the environment. What are you seeing? Are you seeing a change in not just how much they fund, but also what they're going to fund? Are people going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and saying, okay, it's only critical needs? Or are they saying we still need art and music and culture more than ever before because we're going through tough times? What are you seeing in that?
I actually think there's been a change. So when we did the analysis, when I was at the Community Foundation back at the GFC, and we did the analysis of where the grants went, there was a definite shift at that time away from culture and arts and international development into social and community services in Australia. Right. And certainly I think that with the COVID-19 response, there will have been an increase in those direct needs. So, for example, in Sydney, they've done some research, single parents, young people, unemployed people, they're seeing an 80% increase in demand for services in the first sort of 3 months. So absolutely some of that direct need reallocation is going into those sorts of services, but we have not seen people walking away from other areas. So there has been an increase in environmental funding, absolutely in arts funding. And I think the arts funding has also been a direct response to how people perceive the government to have behaved in this. And there is a sense that they've just turned their back on it and walked away. And people are really angry about that. So they're speaking, you know, they're sending their message with their actions. And we've seen some extraordinary, clever and strategic and generous response in arts funding. The other area that is receiving a lot more philanthropic funding is First Nations. And I think this is all part of, you know, we've got a referendum later this year. We've just had the 3rd anniversary of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We've got the whole Voice Treaty Truth kind of campaign about to start. We've now got the Black Lives Matter bringing up all of those questions of fundamental structural racism and injustice. You know, Australia has the highest death rate of Indigenous people in incarceration in the world. I mean, it's really not a statistic to be proud of. So we have seen a big increase in that. Now, that really hasn't got anything to do with COVID-19. I think that's really been the last couple of years of people actually starting to think about this and saying, shit, we've got a serious problem here. We actually need to do something quite different. So, yeah.
It's interesting when you think it's been an extraordinary couple of months, but you've just listed a whole range of issues there. And we really are going into 2020 with the same problems that we had before 2020.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any, you've referred to the fact that thank goodness, a lot of your members are saying, I'm going to continue to fund the things I funded last year. But is there anything you're seeing as far as creativity where people are coming together in a different way, or combining their funds, or doing things differently to the way they did before? So a kind of nimbleness that's coming out of necessity.
Yeah. So look, there are a number of things. So I'll just pick up a couple that I'm particularly excited about, and I would like to say, I'd like to see stay and not go back to how it was before. I'd like this to be the new normal. Collaboration has absolutely increased meaningfully. So we've been talking about collaboration in this sector since the bloody year dot, and we talk about it till the cows come home. But actually getting off our butts and doing it well, quite a different story. And what's kind of happened is COVID-19 seems to have accelerated the application of that practice out of, well, we'll think about it and talk about it and strategize till the cows come home, we're now going to do it. So we have seen really, I think, a significant increase in really smart collaboration and collective action. So, you know, there's a difference in philanthropy between parallel play and collaboration. So if I've got a pet project and I go to you, Genevieve, and say, they need 20 grand, I can put 10 in, can you put the other 10 in? That's not collaboration. That's like parallel play in toddlers. It's great. It's terrific. But actually, if I come to you and say, look, there's this really thorny issue, I'm working with some community organisations and some community leaders, we really want to get to the bottom of it. I know you're interested. Do you want to come in and talk to us? And we actually think about it and strategise and work together. And then we end up putting 20,000 into something. That's collaboration. And it's that behaviour now that we're seeing a lot of, particularly in a place-based approach. So I do have to say, Brisbane is the one city we haven't yet seen this in. So in Sydney, Perth, Adelaide and Melbourne and Hobart, we have seen multiple funders come together and work with community in place around a collective response to that city's needs. I haven't found that yet in Brisbane.
So who would lead that? Who leads that in other cities, Sarah?
Look, it changes. So Perth, it's the Fremantle Community Foundation that has started that. In Hobart, it is a private family PAF who just called all the other funders together and said, guys, we got to work differently. In Sydney, it was the Sydney Community Foundation's Women's Fund, actually, that started an initiative, Be Kind Sydney, that has built that. And in Melbourne, we've actually got a couple of those, which is quite funny because you could say they're kind of in competition, but they've now sort of come together, that has been initiated, one by the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and one by the Australian Communities Foundation. So largely out of the community foundation sector, who are those kind of place-based kind of North Star of community philanthropy.
Yeah. That sounds like a bit of homework for us, Sarah.
Yeah, be good. And just the other innovation, Genevieve, and this I don't think applies necessarily so much to you guys as a giving circle, but it's also accelerated people's thinking about how do they put their endowments to work as well as just their grant making. So how do they use their endowments to get working capital into nonprofits? You know, how do we really accelerate social finance type ways of getting more money into nonprofits through different vehicles and mechanisms, and that's I think quite exciting too.
Yeah, it's interesting when we have so much going on. It's just great to see that there's still that creativity and that we're actually growing some interesting solutions at a time rather than flailing around. It sounds like the community is really a completely different community in Australia, Philanthropy, than it was 10 years ago.
I really believe it is, totally.
I just want to remind, I was going to remind people to send their questions in, and now I'm reading 3 here. So I'm just going to put a few of them forward to you, Sarah. Now, Leslie Ray has put forward the question, Sarah, what are your thoughts around impact investing at this time?
Look, I think impact investing is inevitable, because it is just an extension of us realizing what tools and assets we've got to create positive change. So I would actually like to see it accelerate faster than it has in Australia. We've had some great early adopters, but actually we need a bit of a push to the next step, because essentially, you know, philanthropy is actually not about philanthropy. It's not about grants or anything else. It's actually about the change. So how do you put the resources into the change makers in the right way, at the right time, in the right quantity, with the right support that creates that change? And whether that resource is a grant or an impact investment or a loan or, you know, anything else, it's actually not about the tool. So I think, you know, the opportunity with impact investing, with mission related investing, is this whole kind of sense of an impact economy. Like, why can't we think about our whole economy as having the duality of positive social change and inclusion and social justice, as well as economic growth? And so, you know, that's the opportunity for impact investing, because the dollars, I mean, I think, you know, structured philanthropy puts, I don't know, whatever it is, $11 billion worth of grants a year into social change. You know, if you look at assets under management in just philanthropic endowments, I mean, I don't know, 90 billion, 120 billion, you know, your scale of change when you put more fuel into those engines is really exciting. And the other thing it does is it helps drive a focus on really being sure that you're getting the change that you want, because it allows people to measure impact in more inclusive ways than just looking at financial outcomes or GDP or anything else.
Just so one of our members has asked the question based on what you've said. Do you have a view on organisations sitting on endowments, and whether this year or any time is a time to reconsider how you sit on your endowments and whether you should be sitting on them?
Okay. So can I just take that in? I'll take that in two parts. So part of that question I'm wondering is whether, you know, this whole in perpetuity question with an endowment. And actually, I think that's up to the philanthropist. I think whether people choose to put an endowment and say, I want this to be in perpetuity, I want it to be multi-generational, I think that's absolutely fine. Or whether people say, I want this to be a tool that I use in my lifetime or within 2 generations. Now, there's a lot of pressure coming out of the States to kind of public rhetoric to say in perpetuity endowments just kind of perpetuate the system, and actually that money's been given away, it should all go out. I don't think that. I think that's up to the donor, to the timeline. However, I do think that that endowment is a powerful tool that can also be used for social change. So the way that endowment is invested, I think is a really peachy opportunity to also support the change, even if that's minimally in terms of an ethical investment overlay, all the way through to, say, being 100% mission related investing. So it's not about saying everybody's got to move into impact investing. I'm not saying that at all. But actually, if you look at that endowment as one of your tools in the kit, then it changes the way you think about it and how you put it to work.
Now, we've had a new question come in, and it's a little bit of a different topic, but it's one you and I touched on earlier this week. How do you see technology changing giving? And I guess this is talking a little bit more about the reflexive giving rather than what we are doing in that planned giving space. So, and the question is, there's lots of easy ways to give online now with Facebook giving and fundraising and donate buttons. And I guess the question is, how do you see that technology changing people's patterns of giving?
So, and look, I should have probably said all these things are my opinions. I'm not saying I'm right, but I will have an opinion on it.
We're here to hear you tonight. So.
Look, I've actually thought about this from when I was, running charities and we were doing online fundraising and all that sort of stuff. One of the things that worries me about the technology question is that I think we conflate purpose and tool. So actually, giving online through GoFundMe and all of the other crowdfunding mechanisms we're not changing giving, we're just changing the how. All right, so it's just a tool that we're using. And so it's a tool like a collection box in a church, or it's a tool like a monthly direct debit from my bank account to my favorite charity. It's just a tool. And so I think what we've got to do when we think about online giving is treat it that way. And a tool can be used really well. So if I've got a nail and I want to whack it into a piece of wood and I get my hammer, which is the tool, and I hammer it in properly, perfect job. But if I use that hammer to bash someone over the head, I've used that tool really badly. And it's the same, I think, with those online giving vehicles. It's how you use the tool. And I do believe that the owner of the tool, so me wielding the hammer and Facebook or anybody else that owns these online tools, have an accountability to make sure that their tools are used as well as possible.
Because we have seen sometimes there's a tragedy and people have, especially Australians, as you said, have that reflexive response to help. And often a GoFundMe site will be set up in the name of a family, and it is not actually the family.
It is ripe for manipulation. And that's what I mean by you can use a tool well or badly. And that's why I think the owner of the tool has an accountability to make sure that the processes around how you can access that tool maximize or minimize the risk. So there's nothing wrong.
So when you're saying that, you're not saying don't. And when you say accountable, do you mean Facebook and the technology?
Yeah, I do. And so with Celeste Barber, actually, Facebook should have known enough about how their tool was being used, because they built the tool and they're selling their tool. They should know enough about it to have been able to say to Celeste when she got to, let's say, I don't know, 100,000, hang on, you wanted to raise 50,000, you're now at 100,000. Are you sure you want it all to go to this cause? Or do you just want to have a think about where the money's going? I mean, one of the good things, I mean, obviously the great thing about the technology is the democratization of giving. So it has made it easy and fast, and that is fantastic. But there is a caveat emptor on this. And actually what people do with their private money is completely up to them. So if I want to start a GoFundMe page to pay for my holiday at Christmas and people give me money for it, that's absolutely fine, as long as it is really clear to the people who are giving money that you're paying for Sarah's holiday. It is not charitable. There's no tax deduction involved. There are no legal requirements. You can't get your money back. All that sort of stuff. So that's what I mean about it's just a tool. And so the people that make the tool and sell the tool have, I think, got an accountability to make sure that the people that buy the tool understand how best to use it.
And one of our members, Sophie's, made the point that, you know, there are even churches and places of worship now using online giving and using e-giving, and particularly in the case of COVID, that's been a safer option actually than exchanging.
Absolutely. So it's a great tool when used well.
Exactly. Now, I just want to remind our members tonight, it's your last chance to ask a question. We are going to try and close up close to 8 because that's what we promised. And at Women in Change, we like to do what we say we're going to do. So please put any last minute questions you've got in there. And if we can't get to any of them, we will we'll lean on Sarah and ask her to have a look at some of them afterwards. While you're doing that, I just want to ask you, Sarah, the Philanthropy Australia put out a Principles of Practice pledge at the beginning of the year.
Yes.
Why was that important? And if you were to pick out, I think there was 11 of them, if you were to pick out 2 or 3 of them for us to think about as purposeful givers, what would they be?
Look, one of them we've already talked about, which is put the community at the centre of your learning. So proactively consult and listen and preference the views and the experience and the expertise of the people you're trying to help over anybody else in terms of what they need and want. The other couple that I'm really excited about that we've seen in this practice is, you know, really try and eliminate as many barriers and restrictions as possible to the funding. So if that means giving untied funding, that would be the kind of nirvana. But, you know, make it as flexible and responsive as possible to the partner that you want to work with. So as unrestricted as you can within your, you know, personal comfort. I also, this is a personal one, because for me, I think the purpose of all strategic philanthropy has actually got to be systemic change. Like, we don't want to keep sending ambulances to the bottom of the cliff. Really, structured giving with intent, is about actually not needing to do that in future. So that amplify the community voices, think about the system that the problem that you're engaging with is happening within, and how do you actually think about solutions to causes rather than just amelioration of the symptoms. And we put that pledge out very early on. I think it was the 17th of March where we released that, because we felt it was really important to put a stake in the ground to say to the community, Australian philanthropy is strategic, it is important, it is smart, it is ethical, and we want to be accountable to you. And we've had sort of 50 of our big members kind of sign on to that. But actually the principles that we put on that are not about COVID-19, they are the principles of good practice philanthropy. And we had a meeting today, actually. We run a fortnightly sort of COVID-19 network meeting with the CEOs of all our sorts of trusts and foundations. We had about 60 people on this workshop today. And it was really interesting. What they said was they've asked us to draft kind of an update to this, which is philanthropy's pledge in the rebuilding phase. So this, if you like, was philanthropy's pledge in the response phase. And what they're saying is, actually, it's easier for us to be braver together. It's easier for us to advance our practice together. So can we kind of do this again, but actually imagine what our role should be in a longer term recovery, which, I mean, was just like music to my ears. It's like, right, I've got a mandate, we're off.
It's that maturity you were talking about. So I guess
really
before we close up tonight, if you had some final words of advice for us as a giving circle, tonight what I heard, and tonight what we have here are people in our community. So some of our members, some of the people who are interested in hearing from you, some charities, we've got a range of organisations. And I guess I'd just like to know, what's your advice to those of us that are either involved in giving or planned giving or thinking about getting involved? I've heard tonight we need to listen, and particularly to the community, and that's been reflected in what you've said about the pledge. It's that planning, the hastening slowly, so to make sure that we make the most of our decision and those special philanthropic dollars, that we think about flexibility this, every year, but this year particularly.
Yep.
Is there anything else that you want us any words you would leave with us?
Look, just maybe a couple of things. One, really, I mean, this might sound flippant, but it's really not. Talk about it. Keep talking about it. Talk about it with your friends, your families, your neighbours, your colleagues, your employees, your politicians, because we have got what we want is more giving. So actually model and enjoy and really be proud of what you're doing. And so shout about it from the rooftops. Shout about the frustrations, the challenges, the lessons, the fun, the joy, because it is contagious, and actually modeling that is really powerful. And I suppose the only other thing I'd say is the bravery thing. Embrace the risk. Like, every now and again, push yourselves into the uncomfortable space with something a bit icky and hard, and embrace the risk and really maximize the bejesus out of the freedom of your social change dollar.
Sarah, thank you so much. It's been a brave conversation tonight. And if anybody would like to pass on their thanks to Sarah, then feel free to do so on the chat, because I know we've muted you all, which is the appropriate etiquette. I really appreciate those last words from you, all of your words tonight, but I think that's a really great call to arms for us. To be brave. So one of the things we miss on these Zoom meetings, as great as they are, is we don't get to applaud you. So I'm just going to applaud, and everybody can add their little applauses on to the chat there, and they're all popping up in front of me. So I can assure you they're all there. Before we go tonight, so formally, thank you, Sarah. What a great conversation, and one of the benefits of this time is we have access to people like you who we otherwise may not have. So thank you very much for your time. I want to thank everybody who's been here tonight. I just want to say a couple more things. We have a conversation with Ronnie Khan happening on July the 16th, so we'll be sending that out to you. What I do want to say is we felt really blessed at the last committee meeting. We have as many members at this time of year as we did last year. That's really heartening. If you're somebody who's joined in tonight and you're thinking about joining, please go and have a look at our website, have a look at how we work. If you're someone who prefers to give in this financial year, you've got about 12 more days to do it, and we would love to have you. If you're someone who's going to think about their giving after that date, we would also like you to join after then, and we're open until really the last gasp because we're flexible and courageous and brave. So please go to our website and we'll be sending details through on that. We've also picked up a couple of things Sarah's talked about tonight. So Sarah, you've referred to some research. We're going to put email together and pick up on some of your points tonight so that we get the full benefit of some of those reports you've referred to. I think particularly that one that SBA did with others around talking about what's happening to our charitable sector is really important, so we'll share that. Our grant applications are opening on the 1st of July, so if you're listening in and you're involved with the charity or you have a cause that you think would like to apply for our grant, we do have the information available and we'll be formally accepting applications from the 1st of July, and those expressions of interest will close on the 28th of August. So in closing, thank you for sharing this hour with us tonight. A big thank you to Sarah, a big thank you to our members, and a big thank you to our friends and the rest of the community that joined us. We have recorded this, so if you would like to share it with someone else, or if there's someone you know who couldn't come, we will be making that available. So in saying that, sign off. Everybody, be safe, be well, and we look forward to talking to you about good giving again soon. Thanks, Sarah.
Pleasure. Thanks, everybody.